So we are back with Bruce Lee. So we're back with part 2 of the Atari 520 STM refurb / repair. Now, if you guys remember and you watched the last video, we opened up the Atari, figured out the power switch was a little wonky, and we kind of tried to fix it, but I did something better. I replaced it, and I'll show you that here shortly. But I learned a lot about the 520 ST in the meantime, more than I probably knew when I owned it as a teenager. One thing I do know is that I really like the 520 STM, or the 520 ST. This is the model that did not come with a floppy drive built into it, and it's also not like the 1040 ST, which has the power supply built into it. So it makes the computer smaller, lighter, easier to move around and carry, and I just think it's a little bit better that way. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about was the operating system, TOS. Now, from what I understand and what I've read, TOS originally was coined after the name Tramiel. Jack Tramiel, who bought Atari back in 83 or 84, whenever it was labeled or coined initially the Tramiel operating system, which I think was then renamed to the operating system. But anyway, the point is TOS, the operating system, is not booted on a disk like other computers, including the Amiga. It's actually on 6 ROMs or 2 ROMs in the later STs. And that makes the computer, when you turn it on, come on almost immediately, which is a great thing. It's beautiful. It's almost just like the Atari 8-bit computers. I think that's cool. And the computer that I have here that we're working on has the original 1.0 version of TOS. So we're going to upgrade that in a future video. I'm actually going to order some 256K EEPROMs. I need 6 of them. By the way, if anybody knows where I can get those for a good price, leave me an email, a comment, find me on Twitter, because I'm looking at them on DigiKey or Mauser, one of those websites, and they're like 28 bucks a piece. So if I could get them a little cheaper, I do want the erasable ones so that we can try different versions of the operating system. But anyway, so that's cool. I'm going to show you the SF354 drive. I actually did repair it and get it to work. The only problem I have is that the SF354 drive is a single-sided, single-density drive. It's the first drive that ever came out with the Atari. It sucks. A lot of the good games, a lot of the good programs were shipped later on in the ST's life on double-sided, double-density discs. So we're going to have to remedy that. I'm going to keep the SF354 in its original state. I don't want to damage it. I don't want to hack it up. I want to keep it and preserve it in its original form. But, you know, maybe we can get a GoTech solution going, and we can, or get an SD card solution going. I don't know exactly which way we'll go, but we'll get to that. But in the meantime, let's take a look at what I did to the ST, and let's continue on with our process of repairing and refurbing this one. Coffee is so much better with Bruce Lee. By the way, leave me some comments if you like what we're doing here. If you don't like what I'm doing here, if you have any comments on what I should be doing here. I'm having fun. I hope you're having fun. So here we go. All right, guys. So what I did was I ordered a new switch for the ST because, as you saw in the last video, the switch was pretty stuck. It was kind of corroded. It wasn't working correctly. So I ordered a new one from digikey.com and went ahead and desoldered the old one, which took a little time and work. If you've ever done any desoldering on one of these old 40-year-old computers, you'll find pretty quickly that the solder is it's pretty old, it's pretty, you know, corroded, and it takes a little work to get it out. So it's always recommended to put some new solder first on the joints and then come back in and actually do the desoldering. Now I've got a 50-watt desoldering iron, and it was doing a pretty good job at pulling the solder out on the smaller pins, but when I got to the actual header pins that actually hold it into the chassis of the motherboard, I had to pull out my the big gun to actually get the solder melted. So it took a little time, a little bit of effort, but I finally got it out. And once I got the switch out, I was able to slide the new switch in. And by the way, this switch is, it seems like a almost exact duplicate of the original Atari switch. I mean, I looked at it pretty closely, and it's almost a one-to-one direct match, and the action of it is really, really smooth. So if you got an old retro computer that uses this rocker switch, I know most of the Atari 8-bit computers and the Atari ST line use them. I would recommend ordering one of these switches and putting them in. They're pretty cheap. I think it was like $4 or $5 for the switch, and it's like glass, just pure smooth once you get it in there. So now we're going to take a look at the floppy drive, the SF354 that I received with the computer. It says makes screaming noises on a little piece of tape that the owner wrote on here. So we're going to take it apart and we're going to inspect the inside. My guess, like most of these old drives, they're belt driven, and probably by this point in time the belt is probably disintegrated or melted or both. So let's go ahead and take out the 6 or 8 screws. I think it's 8 screws total that holds this together, and we'll get to the mechanism and see what's going on. Now this drive doesn't have a built-in controller. The controller is built into the Atari computer itself. So basically what we have here is the drive mechanism and the power supply interface connections to the drive, and then obviously the on-off switch. Alright, so we finally got this thing apart, and right away I can see there's no belt, or the belt is missing or has fallen to pieces. There's the main wheel that controls the spindle for the floppy disk, and you can see up in the upper left hand corner here, this is our drive pulley, and it looks like the belt has pretty much just wound itself around that drive pulley, and it's just basically falling apart. Wasn't unexpected. This is what happens when you have a drive that's, what, 30, 35, 40 years old. And I mean, when these belts go, they just basically turn to mush. And it's actually, they're so nasty, you really don't want to handle them with your hands, because it just leaves black stain on your hands. I mean, the stuff is just like black gook. So I had already anticipated needing a belt for this drive, so I had ordered a 5mm belt kit from eBay, and this kit comes with various lengths of belts that are flat, which is what is required for this drive. It's a flat belt kit, 5mm in width, with different lengths of belts. So I've got plenty of belts for future projects, I can tell you that for sure. So what I decided to do was go with a 5-inch belt, which is what I had seen on another video where somebody restored one of these drives. So I went ahead and kind of filtered out the lengths of the belts on the bench top here, and just tried to pick one that by eyeball that I thought was about 5 inches. And you know, I put that on the drive to see how it operate, and it felt a little loose once I had it on the drive. So at that point I decided to go with a little bit shorter belt, 3.5 inches, make the tension a little stronger, so that we wouldn't have any slippage and the drive would be a little bit, I would think it would be more accurate, while it's doing its thing. All right, so here's the ST put back together. I'm going to go ahead and power it up with the floppy drive off just to show you what the desktop looks like when it doesn't see a floppy drive connected to the computer. You basically get an empty desktop. So that's expected. By the way, I'll show you how I got this mouse, this newer mouse, connected to the ST in just a minute. So let's power on the SF354. I've got a floppy in there, and we'll talk about that in a second, but you can see the light come on the drive now. It's working. And when we come to the desktop, we'll actually see the floppy drive icons, which means that it knows now that there's floppies. Now, the ST has a floppy drive B, because what that does is it allows you to copy a floppy disk to itself, and it uses the A and B terms when it's copying, even though you have one drive. So it's copying from A to drive B, but it's really asking you to flip the disk. Now, one of the problems I ran into, and I figured out, like I said, is that this drive is a single-sided, single-density drive, and it only does 360K when formatted, and that's no good. So we need to come up with a better solution. You can see here I'm actually changing the resolution of the desktop to medium resolution. Now, the ST line of computers supported three resolutions. Low resolution was 320 by 200. Medium resolution 640 by 200, which I can do on this color monitor, and the high resolution, which is 640 by 400 monochrome, and that requires a special high-res monitor for that. So here we have the SF354 single-sided, single-density floppy. Now, ironically, I was able to format this two-sided high-density disk as a single-sided, single-density disk, 360K. I didn't think it was possible, but it worked. Here is the power supply cable that I built just for this floppy drive. Now, this is similar to the one that we did in the last video for the computer. This one obviously has less pins, but I ordered the same type of connector. I used the same type of cable, and I used the same type of power supply. So you can see I've got two new power supplies, one for the drive, one for the computer. And as I said in the last video, I'm going to show you later on how I 3D print covers and cases for those. But in the meantime, let me show you about this mouse adapter that I bought online. I'll provide a link down low. This takes the 9-pin connector and converts it to a USB connector. And by the way, this has jumpers on the board that make this compatible with Atari ST and or the Amiga. But the only caveat is that the mouse that you use obviously has to conform to the PS2 standard. If you guys are familiar with a PS2 standard, it's a much simpler protocol than the newer USB 1.0 and 2.0 and 3.0 standards that we use today for our USB devices. So as long as you can find an older mouse like this Logitech one here that conforms to the PS2 standard, you don't have to use that crappy mouse that came with the ST series, which is horrible, by the way. So you get all the benefits of the optical mouse on the Atari ST, and that makes it a lot nicer to use. So I'm just going to show you around the desktop here a little bit. This is the actual about screen for GEM. And when you see 1985 as the date, that's how you know you have the original TOS operating system. Here you can see me changing the resolution to medium, which is really nice, 640 by 200. Good enough for word processing and other types of productivity apps. Now, keep in mind, guys, this computer has built-in MIDI ports, which we'll look at eventually, in a further series when we take a look at a deep dive into the ST and how to use it. But anyway, look how crisp and clear the screen is. I mean, this monitor is how many years old? And it looks gorgeous. The camera doesn't do it justice, but let me tell you, it's sharp, it's clear, it works great. I'm very happy that the monitor came without any issues. So anyway, that's it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. Next time we come around, we're going to be upgrading the ROMs. We're going to be looking at a hard drive solution, maybe another type of floppy drive that supports double-sided, double-density drives, and then we're going to look at some software. So leave some comments below. Let me know if you guys like what's going on with the ST, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks again.